everybody. This is DID Hatchery and I have dissociative identity disorder. Today I wanted to talk about why it took me so long to realize I had dissociative identity disorder. As a content creator, I've watched other content creators that have dissociative identity disorder, and I've noticed most of them are really young, in their 20s, and they're so aware of everything that's going on with them, which for me is like, wow, that's amazing. I wish I had had that insight when I was in my 20s and they first realized I had this disorder, because I often feel, excuse me, I often feel that if I had known sooner, my brain would have been more pliable. I would have been able to heal myself quicker, but now I'm 47 and my brain is pretty set, and I'm trying now, but you know, your brain is always neuroplastic. It just takes longer when you're older to change the wiring in your brain. And so I just noticed that so many young content creators have known they had DID since they were very young, like early 20s. And to me, that is just amazing, amazing. In my 20s, you could not have convinced me I had this disorder. No. I had teams of doctors trying to convince me that I had it. But part of the reason I didn't realize it, and I'm going to tell you a little story time, is, and a lot of people who watch my channel already know this background, but since I was about 15, I was in psych hospitals. I was part of, you know, the Paris Hilton, I can't think of the name of it right now. In the 90s, they used to ship kids to long-term treatment facilities because insurance started paying for it. And so suddenly everybody was going. And I was one of them. And so from 15 to 18, I was in these facilities almost constantly. I mean, I went in and out, but I would be out for weeks and back in again. You know, it was mostly 3 years in hospitals. And during that time, I learned not to trust mental health professionals at a very young and impressionable, important age, right? And so, you know, when I got out of those facilities and I changed my life, I moved on, I went to college, I started seeing therapists and psychologists there. And I went to college when I was a little older. I was 25 when I started college, because I didn't go to high school really. I went to some of 9th grade, a little bit of 10th, and then I never went back to high school again because I was in hospitals. And so, you know, I went through junior college. That took me 6 years to get a 2-year degree because of my disorder that I did not realize I had. And then I went on to the University of Florida when I was 25. I worked so hard to get there. I was like the most proud moment of my life. It was like arriving there made me feel like, yes, I can be a real person. I never felt like a real person. I'd always felt like an experiment animal. Like I was being experimented on, like constantly being watched by doctors, constantly being questioned by doctors, all that, like my whole life was doctors from 15 to 18, okay? And so I'm kind of dissociated. I didn't realize that when I started this video, but I'm gonna keep trying to go. And so when I got to the University of Florida, I met the first psychologist who understood what was going on with me. Up until I was 25, nobody tried to even understand, okay? In the 90s, they didn't listen to kids, okay? They didn't listen. The idea in the 90s was that adolescents are manipulative, they're going to lie to you, they're going to seek attention, period. So they didn't really listen to what was really going on with you. So they slapped me with a bunch of different labels. One of them was bipolar disorder because my mother was bipolar. But then it turned out I did not have bipolar disorder at all, not even remotely. My DID was being mistaken as bipolar disorder. And so, you know, by the time I got to UF, I didn't trust doctors at all. And so I started seeing a new treatment team, my psychologist at the university, and he was the best psychologist I've ever had, ever. I mean, since, you know, and he also had a dissociative disorder, not DID. He had some form of dissociative disorder that made it easier for him to recognize it in other people. And so he was the first person who put the word dissociative identity disorder in my chart when I was about 26. And that was in 2003. And that's when doctors started asking me. They started asking me, do you think you have dissociative identity disorder? And I would respond like this: I'm not civil. Like, I don't know why, but I was extremely offended by that. It was probably part of the denial of DID, because when you have DID, you go through a long, well, I mean, you can go through a different length phases. In my case, I went through an extremely long phase of denial. It was brought to my attention when I was 26. I did not understand I had it until I was 42. And that was with doctors telling me, they got so sick of it. They stopped telling me. They just started asking me once in a blue moon if I thought I had it. They stopped, like, they knew it wasn't going to work to say, yeah, I think you have this disorder, because I wasn't going to listen. I was I was the same but different than I am now. I was much more impulsive. I was much more angry. I still have lots of anger, but I was much more impulsive and angry and totally distrustful. I mean, I'm still distrustful of people, but I am open to information now. But back then, when I was like 26, I was not open to this information at all. I did not trust doctors. I did not believe what they said. I felt like they were trying to manipulate me. They were something, because of my experience in the mental health care system. And so, no, in my 20s, I never, ever for a second thought I had dissociative identity disorder. Oh my God, my light just went out. Are you kidding me? I just charged these lights. Okay, one light video, you're welcome. Anyway, and so, you know, when I first realized I had it, because you won't even believe what it took for me to realize, like, this is crazy. I can't believe the light went out. Anyway, basically, I had brief periods leading up. I'm just so distracted. While I have a tantrum about the lights and go about fixing them, I'll let you know one of the things I should have said in the video was one of the main reasons I had realized I had dissociative identity disorder was simply because I moved to an entirely different climate. You see, when I was growing up, a lot of my trauma happened in the very hot heat and humidity of Florida. We often didn't have our air conditioner on during certain parts of my childhood. And so I think when I moved to this nice, cool, crisp, non-humid environment, it signaled to my brain, we are safe. And I think that's the real reason why I figured it out then, honestly. Okay, we're back. I had to fix my light. I just cut out, I'm sure I cut out a few things, okay, because I got a little bit frustrated. I don't know exactly where I left off, so I'm sorry if I repeat some information. I just don't think I can make this video again. And so I didn't trust doctors. And so then when I was 42 and I realized I had it, it literally took an altar to materialize before my face in the shower and tell me I had it. Not like a hallucination, like imagining it in your mind, but you didn't imagine it. Just imagine somebody else projected it in front of you. And so Lola Blue, she's the one who told me. I was in the shower and she just materialized and she's like, hi, I'm Lola Blue. You have DID. And I was like, what's happening? Like, that had never happened before. So I got out of the shower and I literally announced to my partner, I guess I have DID. And then I immediately called the doctor who initially understood that that's what I had. Man, this video is a wreck today. It's like the hair, the lights, everything's driving me crazy. Sorry. And so, you know, but prior to that, I did have some moments where I knew for a brief period. There was about maybe 2 moments. I don't know what the time frame was, somewhere in my 30s for a brief time. I For maybe a few weeks, I thought I had DID because my doctors were telling me I did. And then that happened another time. For maybe a month, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. I've got this. And then it just went away. I just didn't believe it anymore. I assume it was like a switch, you know, an alter knew, but others didn't. And those are the two times. But then in the weeks leading up to when I actually realized I had the disorder, a lot of weird stuff happened. Alters were coming out, but like in full force. I think prior to that, they didn't come out in a way that I was aware of. Okay. They were very good at acting like me. I don't know why. And so, I'd say about maybe a month and a half before I realized I had it, I had a bunch of bizarre behaviors. Like, one time I was arguing for something that I entirely disagreed with my full heart. And I totally did not believe a word I was saying. And I totally disagreed with what I was saying, but I was literally like, no, this is the thing. And I didn't understand what was happening. It's like I was watching myself be an entirely different person. Well, that turned out to be Red. Red was saying something that she believed. But I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know what co-consciousness was. I just knew that I was kind of watching myself say weird stuff. And then as soon as I was done saying weird stuff, I said, I don't know why I said that. It's like I snapped it back and I was like, I don't know why I said that. I don't believe that at all. And it was just bizarre. And I had also another separate instance is I my eyes started crying when I wasn't. And it just felt like water coming down my face. And I was like, what? I'd never had that to like consciously before. I wasn't aware of it if it ever happened. Started coming down like water and I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm not crying, you know? And a couple of other things. And then finally it was announced to me. And I do feel that maybe my alters were trying to tell me I had this disorder for a really long time. And I was very dedicated to not understanding it, okay? Not consciously, but I really feel there were parts of me that were like, nope, don't want to understand it at all, you know? And so they had to tell me to my face. And so then I called my old psychologist. I had to leave a message because, you know, you can't just call if you're not a student anymore. So I left him a message and then he had to go through some committees or something. And he called me back about a week later and I was basically, do I have DID? And he was like, yes, you have DID. Like, you could just tell in his voice he'd been waiting for me to understand that for 17 years. And so when I came on YouTube, it was right after I started to realize that my partner, he was like, hey, there are people who make videos about this online. And I was like, oh, you know, because I really wasn't into YouTube. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I was not into YouTube prior to watching these content creators, who have DID. That was like, not that I didn't ever watch YouTube. Of course, I watched a video here and there. I wasn't like a regular watcher. I didn't watch it daily. It was really a video here and there once in a while. And so then I started watching these channels and I was like, oh, you know, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can teach somebody about my experience because that's sort of something I've always wanted to do my whole life. I wanted to write a book about my life and my experiences to help other people to, you know, understand myself. And so this seemed like a good way to do that, was to start making videos. But then I noticed that I was way older than everybody. And I was like, how do these kids know that they have this disorder? How did it take me so long to understand it? And I just think it's probably because when I was young, you know, the 80s, they had the satanic panic, which made nobody believe in DID, you know what I mean? And then the 90s, it carried over to the 90s. And then in the early aughts, it was hugely stigmatized. Doctors didn't even want to mention it in the chart unless they knew, unless they absolutely knew. They wouldn't even say, I suspect they have this, unless they knew, because they knew it could potentially damage their credibility as a doctor at that time. Hopefully it's different now. I'm thinking it's a little bit different now. People seem to be much more open to it than they were before, but not that, I mean, it's still highly stigmatized, obviously, because there's millions of people on the internet that don't believe in it. And I understand why they don't, because of the way it appears to people. despite that appearance being real and true and just how it is, you know? And so, yeah, I was amazed. I was amazed that people knew. And I always thought, yeah, if I'd only known in my 20s, I could have like fixed this. I could have hurried and fixed it, you know, but even if I knew in my 20s, I don't think I would have hurried and fixed it. I don't. I was too wild and stubborn and transfixed on what I wanted. And what I'd always wanted was to be a real girl, like Pinocchio. I wanted to be a real person. I didn't want to be a hospital person. I didn't want to be a mentally ill person. I wanted to be a successful person. And I was like almost exclusively focused on that. So it was sort of like some altars were like totally focused on us becoming a professor, a professional writer, a poet, something with heft, something that would make people treat us with respect, because we'd never had that. But at the same time, parts were trying to do that, while other parts were having entire nervous breakdowns, okay? I had to drop out of so many classes. That's why I never finished. I had to keep dropping out because I would put myself under such stress, I would end up trying to unalive. And so some parts were like school, no matter what. Other parts were like, this is killing us. We're going to die. We can't handle the stress. But the parts that were like school were like slapping down the parts that were like stress. And so what ended up happening is I made tons of unaliving attempts. And then I didn't care that I made them because I needed to do school. Like, it was really not okay and not healthy. I remember one time, and this was bad, when I had done something awful to my arm, and I was in the infirmary at the school, and they called my psychologist down to the infirmary, and I was freaking out on him. I'm like, I've got tests to do. I can't go to no hospital. Like, parts did not care that other parts were hurting because we didn't know we had parts. All we knew was like every 6 months, we usually had to attempt to just relieve stress. And then we would end up get our stomach pumped, end up in the hospital, go back to school, and we would act like it didn't happen. So that's what fragmentation looked like for us. And it was so dangerous. It was so dangerous. I'm just lucky I don't have any permanent damage from all of it, all of those overdoses. And that's why it's important for people with DID to get treatment. That's why it's important to be in therapy and to actively be working on it. If I did not actively work hard every day, I think I would be a maniac. I think I would still be doing the stuff I was doing when I was younger. Oh, I'd probably be dead. Like, let's be honest. And that's another reason I don't believe in self-diagnosing DID in particular, okay? In particular, I do think, I think people can recognize when they're depressed. I think people can recognize when they're anxious and things like that. Those things, self-diagnose all you want. But dissociative identity disorder, no. You should never try to self-diagnose that, because part of the disorder is not understanding what is happening. Part of the disorder is amnesia. Part of the disorder is absolute confusion and dissociation. And no, you shouldn't be trying to diagnose yourself with something like that, because there are other disorders that have similar symptoms that you could be mistaking it for. And trust me, you don't want it either. You don't want this disorder either. It is not fun at all. Except for brief moments, like in my last video, where you have like this moment of like brilliance, but mostly it's a lot of hard work at dealing with your own PTSD, trying to cope with daily living. Like, I'm entirely built for emergencies. I can't cope with daily life. And that's just how it is when you have a trauma disorder like this. And so I just think it's very important to get professional help when you have it. And sometimes it can be very hard to see because of the dissociation. I had so many layers of alters, some trying to inform me that I had this disorder, others trying to make me not know. And it was so much easier for me to just not know. And so I think I just leaned towards just not knowing and focusing on my real life, where I was going to be a professor and a poet and blah, blah. And as you see, I never got to do any of that because I didn't understand my disorder soon enough. And that's I wish I had. I wish I had believed my doctors day one and immediately started working on it. But I was mentally ill. You know, you can't. And I had a history of distrust. And so it was just really hard for me to believe it until it was really in my face. And then once it was in my face, it was like a veil was lifted. Once Lola Blue told me, it's like I never forgot again. It was time. It was time for me to know. And the thing is a lot of alters are extremely resentful of me. Part of the reason that a lot of my alters hate us, and I don't know what alter I am right now. Like, I have a number of alters that act as Brandy, you know, like a number of alters that are named Brandy. Okay. Or maybe I'm not Brandy. I don't know. I just don't know who I am all the time. But what was I saying? Oh, well, now I forgot what I was saying because I was trying to clarify. Well, there goes that. Anyway, it was nice. I missed you guys. I just wanted to say hi. Not wearing any makeup today, and I've got the skin of a peasant. You're all welcome. Very reddish, ruddy peasant skin. I was built for like carrying sacks of flour. I'm pretty sure I was built for carrying flour. Some of us were built for being a princess. Some of us were built to haul flour. You're welcome. You're welcome. Anyway, you guys have a good one. Bye.